I think as a culture, not just as academics, we commonly take it for granted that scientific knowledge must advance, that there is much we don't know, and much that we will live out our lives without knowing. Knowledge of the physical universe beyond the solar system and the galaxy, despite the Hubble telescope, remains so limited it's hard even to calculate its partiality, but we now have kind of a glimpse of what it is that we might not know about the universe. The nature of life elsewhere in the universe remains beyond our grasp, as does such knowledge of the human body that would enable us to control diseases like cancer. So both out there and in here, we remain in some ways fundamentally ignorant. And yet, despite that, we often unreflectively, uncritically, and in a learned form of self-deception, imagine that we actually know ourselves and know our history. Being part of human culture means collectively taking on the burden of that kind of illusion, training one another through institutions and social and interpersonal practices to see falsely. One of the tasks of the humanities is not only to show us when artists and others have penetrated our illusions and created, whether modestly or grandly, but also to try to discover in a basic way when human cultures have seen through a glass darkly. In so doing, we encounter resistance both angry and dismissive. Resistance, however, arguably more fundamental and intransigent than some current opposition to paradigm shifts in the sciences. To accept the physical universe is something different than what we have thought is intermittently difficult. Perhaps more so when knowledge confronts and contradicts religious conviction or other deeply felt beliefs. Then, of course, such differences about the physical world can be dangerous or even fatal. On the other hand, the demand that we see ourselves differently, the assertion that knowledge of ourselves and our history is fundamentally false, which is part of the continuous burden of the humanities, is almost always unwelcome. The humanities is inherently a project of both learning and unlearning, of celebrating old and new achievements while working to divest ourselves of error and blindness. It's thus not only the present that's inherently unstable, but also the past. The past keeps changing. Forgotten documents and artistic achievements are recovered. Cultural practices are reassessed. The humanities are devoted, therefore, not only to preserving the monuments of the past, but also to navigating the shifting terrain of all historical knowledge. From paleontology to evolutionary biology, to climate science, to medicine, as of course it was once notoriously with astronomy, science continues to be the enemy of certain people's belief systems. Despite that, however, there is no longer any broad, popularly or politically accepted model of a universally static science, of science that does not evolve, that simply transmits the best that has been thought and said, let alone of a science that never questions whether its factual conclusions or evaluative judgments are sound. Yet the humanities, I believe, has myriad advocates at universities, among conservative organizations and columnists, and certainly amongst politicians, of a heritage preserved in amber, of disciplines that they would prefer be largely frozen in time. Science today perhaps mostly fights battles against specific convictions. And those battles can certainly have a cost, to be sure, given that animal experimentation, sex research, and other target areas have been compromised when universities have caved to populist offensives. And given that such specializations as climate science can face powerful political opposition. But these remain, in some ways, fundamentally local ideological struggles. The humanities is potentially comprehensively at odds with what people believe they fundamentally are, thus also with what comprehensive ends education and culture should serve. Of course, if scientists often avoid more fundamental cultural challenges, humanists often credit themselves with upsetting the existing order when they are actually doing something far less fundamental. I offer all these comparisons with awareness that counterexamples can be found, while recognizing at the same time that the different kinds of existing challenges to sciences and the humanities, specifically in the contemporary world, need to be acknowledged and considered. They are all, moreover, contingent products of history. The relationship between the sciences and the humanities changes over time. Their relative capacity to threaten received wisdom has varied immensely throughout history. The awesome costs of laboratory sciences as we know them now are largely a post-war phenomenon. The perilous financial state of the humanities now has been largely a decade in making, and it will get worse with further program closures over the next few years. The current ongoing assault against research in the humanities aims to limit the possibility that the humanities will expose not only the imperfect ethical character of our political and economic systems and the hollow character of the work many people are locked into for most of their lives, but also the unjustified and unwarranted character of our understanding of human nature. Of course, when science and the humanities join forces, all such matters can be placed on the table for consideration, but experimental science on its own does not guarantee that they will be. Because the sciences and the humanities often don't collaborate effectively, in fact, science's potential to challenge cultural assumptions sometimes remains unrealized. Human genome research, for example, has long eliminated any basis for believing that popular conceptions of race have any basis in biological reality. Yet many, I think perhaps most Americans, still cling to the construction of the biological fiction of racial difference. Eliminating the psychological and ideological belief in racial difference would have major social benefits. There would be a few social benefits to that in New Mexico. There might have been some social benefits if people realized it 300 years ago, and yet the goal is still out of reach. What's more, current science publishing practices, which maximize the institutional rewards for multiple articles of minimal originality or import, regularly bracket the epistemological implications of scientific research. But even if scientists were pressing epistemological doubt in a way that most of them do not, I think few in the political or commercial worlds would be willing to abandon the profit potential in scientific research that would vanish if science were cast back into the Dark Ages. Despite the counter-evidence, and it's real, of profitability apparent in the humanities-based entertainment industry, from books to films to TV to music lyrics, many purported stakeholders seem willing to do just that with the humanities, to cast it back into the Dark Ages. In any case, I really don't think there is any widespread conviction that science as a whole needs to be reined in and housebroken. There is every reason to suppose that's exactly what some corporate, cultural, and political forces seek to do to the humanities. In the light of this ongoing assault, can we prevent the humanities from being housebroken? Can we preserve the academic freedom to celebrate diverse and idiosyncratic cultural achievements and to draw provocative comparisons and contrasts across the whole of human knowledge? Can we preserve ethnic studies programs? Can we maintain the capacity to challenge received beliefs, the confidence in righteous nationhood, and our cultural blindness to injustice and prejudice? Can we sustain the humanities' necessary resistance to instrumental models of the educational mission? The main structural support for all these endeavors for decades has been the tenure system. Tenure doesn't guarantee that all humanities faculty will be courageous in their teaching, writing, and research. You've probably noticed that, let alone their institutional participation. But tenure can protect those who are courageous. Unfortunately, the massive reliance on contingent faculty continues to grow. It's largely eroded the tenure system at some institutions and eliminated it from much community college teaching, with the exception of the community colleges that you've got here, which are community colleges in some ways in name only.